Hello. Today, I would like to talk to you about attachments and suffering. Does that sound like a fun conversation to have? Maybe not. But as we go into this year's holiday season, it could be just the conversation that we need. I know it was the conversation I needed, so I'm here to share it with you. Friends, welcome back to Heartscapes, where we are practicing the system of Reiki at the intersection of self-development, spiritual practice, and social action. My name is Michaela. I'm really glad to have you back with me in my studio today. So, attachments. This is one of those concepts that is present in the Buddhist system that can be a little bit confusing and challenging to understand how it fits into our day-to-day life. And because esoteric Buddhism from its Japanese origins is one of the foundational lineages of the system of Reiki, it's one that I work with an awful lot. So I find it really valuable and essential, really, in my practice and in working with my students to dig into some of these concepts and to understand as well as we can what they mean in their original context and what they mean, what that context means for our day-to-day life. Because as I often say, if we can't apply these things to our day-to-day life, then they have very little value for us. So, attachments and suffering. So, from the Buddhist perspective, we learn that life has pain. Shocker, I know, right? It's stunning. There is pain in life. And that our suffering about that pain comes from our tight attachments to things, to experiences, to identities in our life. That there is a way out of this suffering, and that way is by practicing the system of Buddhism, or in our case, the system of Reiki. It's Buddhism's little cousin. And so, attachments. What do we mean by attachments, and why do these attachments make us suffer? Well, I think, the way I want to answer that, I don't know if it's the best way, but the way I want to answer that is with just a recent experience that I am just kind of still in the midst of. You might be able to hear in my voice, it sounds a little off today because I'm in the last throes of a bout with COVID. And this is the first time I have experienced this illness in this pandemic that we have unfortunately been riding for 3 years now. Yeah, 3 years. I got pretty sick there for a few days. Luckily, it went pretty quickly. At least the days of feeling truly wretched were brief. However, one thing that I became very aware of is that my suffering, my pain in the midst of this disease, as I felt truly awful, was magnified by something I was attached to. And I feel really grateful that I was able to recognize that, because then I could address it right away. And what I was attached to was this image that I had developed of myself, this identity, if you will, that I had come to take on, not even all that consciously, as a person who had survived the COVID-19 pandemic without getting sick. Because I hadn't gotten sick all the way until now. And it had apparently become something that was important to me, something that I saw as being part of my identity, as somebody who was able to, maintain my wellness. Maybe there was a little piece of ego attached. Strike that. There was definitely a piece of ego attached to the idea that here I am, a wellness professional who survived the pandemic and didn't get sick. And so here I am, sick, feeling miserable, truly wretched. And part of me is punishing myself, dwelling in regret and irritation and anger about the fact that I'm sick, right? Not the experience of being sick, but the fact that I had gotten sick, despite this identity that I had developed as somebody who was not going to get sick. And it was one of those laughable moments when I became aware of it. Like, look at you, attached. Because I really was. I was attached to this vision of myself. I wasn't willing to let it go right away, right? Rather than just being like, well, I wasn't sick, but now I am, so that's over. I was attached to this identity, and I was mad that I had to let it go. And that irritation, that anger, robbed energy from my healing process, right? Luckily, it was only a day or so of this experience before I noticed it. I caught it. I began addressing it. I began applying my Reiki practice to it. One of the things that is very specific to practicing Reiki from the perspective of its Japanese origins is that we use specific practices inside the system to address our attachments. And so by doing that, I was able to let go of this ego part of myself that wanted to stay, be able to say at some future date, yeah, I never got sick during the pandemic. I was able to let that go and just free up that energy that was getting spent on that nonsense to just healing my body and getting through it. But that's an example of a place where we can get attached to any number of things. In this case, a particular vision of myself, of who I am and who I will be in the future. It can be attachments to other aspects of our identity, attachments to experiences that we don't want to end, but ultimately are going to, because everything ends, everything changes. We can be very attached to people in our life, right? We can be attached to what we believe they mean to us. We can be attached to how they show up in our life. And when that changes, it can cause us suffering. We can be attached to who we believe they are, which might be quite different than who they actually are, who they want to be for us or to us. And if we come to terms with that, or we confront it, or perhaps the person confronts us with how we're misunderstanding them, that can be an attachment that causes us suffering. We can be attached to the material things in our life, all of which we're going to lose eventually, but much of which we're going to lose just in the course of our living our life, right? Nothing that we experience in our life will stay the same, right? Life is change. By its very nature, life is changing all the time. And when we stay attached to the way things were or the way things are, if we stay attached to a hope for how they might be in the future, or a vision or a goal about how things might be in the future, if we stay attached to the things that we don't want to let go, that is a significant source of suffering. Because how often do we feel anger or sorrow for the things that we've lost, for the ways in which our lives have changed, the ways in which we might have changed, even if those changes are positive, right? This is such an interesting paradox that has been noted in so many different contexts, psychological contexts, spiritual contexts, that so often, if we're not prepared for change, if we don't have practices and mindsets and perspectives and worldviews that accept an openness to change, then even positive changes can hit our nervous system as, something to be afraid of or angry about or anxious about, right? So much anxiety about the ways in which things change in our lives when we're not in a robust practice that allows us to be open to change. It's not to say we always have to like the changes that happen, but how do we meet that sense of dissatisfaction, that sense of discomfort with what is changing? Do we meet it with spaciousness, with room to allow that change to occur? Or do we meet it with contraction, with, hunkering down around our desires, our fears, our angers? So attachment leads to suffering, which leads to more suffering, which often leads us to spread that suffering to other people, which leads to more suffering, right? It's a cycle. It's something that can ripple out from us in all directions, farther and wider than we probably know. Or the opposite, spaciousness, compassion for ourselves and for others in the midst of change, gratitude for what we have experienced and learned, for what we will experience and learn and have in the future, even though we don't know what that is yet. These things can ripple out from us and touch people and make changes and impacts far beyond ourselves. It's a choice. And so this felt really alive for me going into the holiday season as I, connect with folks and open space for folks who are struggling with the holidays. There are so many reasons why the holidays can be overwhelming, right? It can be overwhelmingly joyful, overwhelmingly challenging. It can be both of those things at the same time, which can feel like way too much. It can be times when we are having to be in close proximity to people that we'd really rather keep out of our lives, but family tradition dictates that we go to dinner with them. It can be times when we remember people we've lost and have great sorrow about that. You could probably tell me many, many, many more examples of how a concentrated time of mass celebration and family traditions can bring up a lot of attachment and a lot of suffering. And what I want to offer us today is an opportunity to pause, use practices that give us a little bit of mental and emotional space from all of those intense feelings, make a little more room inside of ourselves, and to inquire honestly inside of ourselves. Is there something inside of this situation that I am overly attached to that is contributing to my suffering here? That's not to say that we let anybody off the hook for harm that they have caused, for example, right? This is not to say, oh, everything is just our own fault. If family members have caused us pain and that's why we don't want to be around them during the holidays, well, it's really just up to you to change how you perceive them. That's not what I'm saying at all. When people have harmed us, it can be appropriate, if it is good and right for us, to challenge that harm, to intervene, to seek help, to subtract ourselves from the situation. Absolutely. In addition to that, is there something that I am holding on to, that I am attached to, that is increasing my suffering in this situation? For example, if I have chosen to step back from celebrating holidays with my family because of some situation that has caused me harm, am I attached to any feelings of guilt about that? Am I attached to any feelings of self-righteousness about that? Am I attached to some vision of myself that is somehow in conflict with that decision, and those attachments are making me feel like I'm suffering? Am I attached to memories of how things used to be? Am I attached to memories of people or experiences that I've lost? Attached to them, gripping them instead of acknowledging them with love and compassion and putting space around them inside of myself. These are some of the ways to look at this. There are a number of things that we can be attached to, for example, going into the holiday season, that can cause us to feel upset, to feel sad, to feel angry, to feel afraid, to feel stuck in the past or dwelling on the future, instead of being with our full self here in this moment, with the people who are here in this moment. So the system of Reiki offers us some practices for this. This was one of the things that had the first and most immediate impact in my life when I first started practicing Reiki from the perspective of its Japanese origins, because the emphasis inside of that system and that perspective is bringing our attention in and down into ourselves, finding that spark of our true self that is always whole, always connected, always grounded, always spacious, connecting with that part of ourself, and then expanding that part to fill our whole self, to surround ourself, to expand outward from ourself and connect it to all of the other people in our lives. And doing that practice diligently over time truly does change how we feel inside with regard to our attachments. Changes how we feel inside with regard to a lot of things. But specifically for our conversation today, it changes how tightly we are gripping on to those things to which we are attached. Puts space around them. It puts them into context in the larger scheme of things. It makes us feel resourced and emotionally resilient and grounded and deeply rooted so that those things don't matter as much, right? Because one of the reasons that we get attached, especially to material things or to resources or to people who are supportive to us, one of the reasons we can get so attached is because we don't feel like we're going to get those resources anywhere else. We feel ungrounded, unresourced, unnourished, unsupported. And so these practices cause us to feel all of those qualities of groundedness, support, nourishment, resources from the inside out, from our essential nature, from our essential connection to the earth, which is boundlessly resourced, to the web of life, to each other, to our own soul, to our own personhood, to the animals around us, to the plant life around us. And all of a sudden, those things that we've been gripping so tightly, that we're so attached to, they just matter less. They just matter less. Maybe they're not totally eradicated from our heart, but they just don't matter so much. Just like that perception of myself, right? That image I apparently had in my mind of years from now saying to somebody in some conversation, yeah, I survived that pandemic. I never got sick. For some reason, I was attached to that. And when I applied these practices, I was able to put space around it, and it just didn't matter anymore. It just did not. And that's a small example, right? That's a low stakes example. But we can have that same transformative experience with things that are high stakes, things that matter a lot to us, things that have been entrenched with us for a long time, things we have carried for a long, long time. And I know that because I've applied this to those things too, over time. And I've seen other people do it, and I have seen them come out different and resourced and feeling so much more freedom and liberation from that suffering that had bound them up for so long. So that's what I wish for us this holiday season, in the new year, and in all of our years to come. Freedom from our attachments that cause us suffering. And I'm grateful that I have found a system of practice that helps me get there little by little, and that I get to share with other folks. So I often share in these videos a link to a previous video that shares some of these foundational practices that you can take into your life to begin to work on these things for yourself. I will link that video again down below in the show notes. And I really encourage you to work with it, to just give it a try. If there's something that feels kind of stuck for you, something kind of constricted, something that's bothering you, that you feel, that you're kind of gripping towards, just give it a try. Apply these practices to that experience and see what happens. And I would love to know what happens for you. I invite you to engage with me either down in the comments of this video or send me an email. Let me know how those experiences went. If you want to stay connected, if you'd like to work with me further on any of this, there'll be information on how to do that down below. And as you move throughout your day, as you examine your attachments, as you prepare for your feasts during this time, or you prepare to spend some good, maybe challenging time alone during this holiday season, please know that you are deeply resourced, you're deeply connected, you are deeply loved by this earth, by the life all around you, by that spark of self deep inside of you, and by me. May you be deeply resourced for this journey. And until next time, thank you for being with me. I love you. Bye-bye.